everybody. Today, Honey is going to read My Weird School Days. Mrs Dole is Out of Control. Written by Dan Goodman and illustrated by Jim Pelliot. Chapter 1. The New PTA President. My name is AJ and I hate school. But do you know what? Soon I won't have to go to school anymore for a long time. You know why? Because today is the first day of June. Yay! June is the best month of the year because it's when summer starts. Yippee! No school until September. Me and my guys were putting our backpacks into our cubbies. It was Michael who started singing the best song in the history of the world. No more pencils, sang Michael, who never ties his shoes. No more books, sang Ryan, who will eat anything if stuff that isn't food. No more teachers, sang Neil, who called Neil Nut Kid, even though he wear clothes. Dirty looks, I sang. That's when Andrea came in. She is an annoying girl and curly brown hair who loves school. Andrea had on her mean face. Hey, Andrea, I said. What's with the mean face? Are you mad because school is almost over? No, although, said Andrea. Calls me by my real name because she knows I don't like it. That's not why I'm mad. Did you hear about the PTA election last night? No, my mother was running for president, Andrea said, but she came in second, so she has to be vice president again. Big deal, I told Andrea. If the president gets assassinated, then your mom will become president. Nobody assassinates PTA president, although Andrea said, rolling her eyes. They do too, I told her. Do not! Do too! We went back and forth like that for a while. Shish, what a grouch. So what if her mom isn't PTA president? Andrea would take a chill pill. I went to my seat, which is next to Ryan's. Where is Mrs. Daisy? Ryan asked. I looked around. Our teacher, Mrs. Daisy, was nowhere to be found. She usually gets to class early. Mrs. Daisy used to be called Miss Daisy, but then she got married. Ladies become Mrs. when they get married. Nobody knows why. Since Mrs. Daisy wasn't around, I crumpled up a piece of paper and threw it at Andrea. It bounced off her head. Arlo! Andrea shouted. Why did you do that? Does there have to be a reason? Suddenly, Mrs. Clutch came running into the class. He's the principal of elementary school, and he has no hair at all. Most principals polish their shoes, but Mr. Clutch polishes his head. Mrs. Daisy will be late today, he said. She has a doctor's appointment. Is Mrs. Daisy sick? Asked Emily, who was Andrea's crybaby friend. She looked all worried, like she does whenever anybody in the world is sick. She's fine, said Mr. Clutch. Actually, I'm glad Mrs. Daisy is late, because the new PTA president wanted to speak to you in private. I'd like to introduce Mr. Clutch never had a chance to finish his sentence. You'll never believe in a million hundred years who walked into the door. Nobody, because if you walked into a door, it would get hurt. But you'll never believe who walked into the doorway. It was Ryan's mom, Mrs. Dole. Wow, Ryan's mom was the new PTA president. Congratulations, Mrs. Dole, said Mr. Clutch. I'm sure you'll do a great job. Mr. Clutch had to go to a meeting, so he left Ryan's mom to watch us. Mrs. Dole looked a lot like Ryan, except that she's a lady and old. When she walked into our class, Ryan hid under his desk. I couldn't blame him. That's what I would do if my mom walked into the class. Parents should never come into your class unless it's your birthday and you're bringing cupcakes for everybody. That's the first rule of being a kid. Wow, the president of the PTA is important, I whispered to Ryan. That's almost like being a president of the United States. Ryan stood farther under his desk. Andrea crossed her arms and said, humph. Whenever everybody crosses their arms and has humps, it means they're mad. Nobody knows why. Good morning, said Mrs. Dole. Are you kids excited about the end of the school? Yes, said all the boys. No, said all the girls. Are you excited about moving up to third grade? Then Mrs. Dole asked. Yes, said all the girls. No, said all the boys. I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to give a present to Mrs. Daisy, said Mrs. Dole. She worked so hard for you all year. Then what would you like to give her? Give her a skateboard, I said. That's what you want, Arlo, Andrea said, rolling her eyes. Try to think of something Mrs. Daisy would want, Mrs. Dole said. What does she like more than anything? Flowers? Suggested now the nude kid. Shoes? Said Michael. Suddenly I got the greatest idea in the history of the world. Bonbons! I shouted. Yeah, bonbons! Everybody agreed. Bonbons are yummy chocolate treats. Mrs. Daisy eats them all the time. Well, not while she's taking a shower. That could be weird. She told us that she can eat a whole box of bonbons in one sitting. Everybody thought giving Mrs. Daisy bonbons was a great idea. Now the nude kid said I should get the Nobel Prize. That's the prize they give out to people who doesn't have bells. Okay, your homework is to buy a present for Mrs. Daisy and bring it to school tomorrow, said Mrs. Dole. Any questions? Are we going to get more homework in third grade? Asked Emily. I'm not sure, Mrs. Dole said. Next year you'll learn multiplication table and you're going to learn all about Mrs. Dole didn't get the chance to finish her sentence because that's when the strangest thing in the history of the world happened. She started crying. You kids are growing up so fast, Mrs. Dole blubbered. I can hardly believe that my little baby Ryan is going to be a third grader. It seems like only yesterday he was in the diapers. Everybody looked at Ryan, who was still hiding under his desk. You wore diapers yesterday? I asked him. Mrs. Dole continued. I remember when all my baby could say was goo goo gaga, and all he can do was pee. I had to wipe his little bottom for him. And now look at him. Everybody looked at Ryan. Mrs. Dole grabbed a tissue from Mrs. Daisy's desk and blew her nose into it. Into the tissue, that is. Blowing your nose into a desk would be weird. I'm sorry, I got so emotional with my baby, she said, and she ran out the door. Is she gone? Ryan asked. Yeah, you can come out of under your desk now, Michaela said. Your mom is weird, I told Ryan. I know, he replied. She does overboard a lot. She jumps out of boats, I asked. That's really weird. There were no grown-ups in the room, so I got up and shook my butt in the class. Some of the kids laughed. Then me and Michael and Neil teased Ryan for all the peeing he did when he was a baby. That's what all babies do, although Andrea said. Well, I'm never having a baby, I told her. You can have a baby, although Andrea said. You're a boy. You can't have a baby, although Andrea said. You're a boy. Phew, that's a relief. Babies just pee all day. I wouldn't want to have one anyway. We had to stop talking about peeing because guess who came into the room at the very second? It was Mrs. Daisy. Chapter 3. Good Old Days. Mrs. Daisy came in our reading teacher, Mrs. Mackey, who were holding hands and making goo-goo eyes at each other. Oh, disgusting. Mr. Mackey said he would meet her in the teacher's lounge at lunchtime. Mrs. Daisy and Mr. Mackey haven't been married very long. That's why they're so mushy over each other. Once they've been married for a few years, they'll stop doing all that mushy stuff. My parents have been married for like a century, and they hardly ever do mushy stuff. Are you sick, Mrs. Daisy? Asked Emily. Mrs. Coates told us you went to the doctor. It was just a checkup, she replied. Let's get to work. It's time for our word of the day. Today's word is unique. What does that mean? Asked Michael. I have no idea, said Mrs. Daisy, who doesn't know anything. Does everybody know what unique means? Andrea stuck her head in the air. Of course. Little Miss I know everything and keeps a dictionary on her desk so she can look up words and show everybody how smart she is. But Mrs. Daisy called me instead. Unique means furniture that's really old, I said. My mom has a unique table. Everybody laughed even though I didn't say anything funny. That's antique, dumbhead, said Andrea. Unique means something that's one of a kind. Oh, snap, said Ryan. I know that, I lied. But a really old piece of furniture that's one of a kind is unique. It's a unique antique. Nah, boo-boo on Andrea. On her face. No wonder I'm the gifted and talented program. After we finished our word of the day, it's time for writing. I hate writing. The school year is almost over, Mrs. Daisy said as she passed out pieces of paper. Let's write about our favorite memories of the second grade. Mrs. Daisy told us to close our eyes and remember some of the nice things that happened since September. Remember the time Mrs. Rupee dressed up like Johnny Appleseed? Asked Andrea. Yeah, we all said. Mrs. Rupee is Loopy. Remember the time we went on a field trip and Mr. Docker ate a bug? Asked Ryan. Yeah, Mr. Docker is off his rocket. Remember the time we drove the substitute teacher and Mrs. Todd crazy and she ran screaming into the parking lot? Michael laughed. Yeah, Miss Todd is odd. I couldn't decide if I should write about the time Mr. Clutch was hanging from the flagpole or the time Nell, the nude kid's ferret, pooped on Emily's head. Remember the time we had a food fight in the vomitoria? Nell asked. Yeah, that was great, I must admit. Even though I hate school, we had some fun in second grade. Those days were good old days, I said. Remember the time we had a sleepover in the Natural History Museum and a great his-talking cockroach crawled into Emily's sleeping bag? That happened last week, Arlo, Andrea said. So did your face, I told her. Mrs. Daisy said she was going to go to the ladies' room, that she should get started writing while she was gone. As soon as she left, I crumpled up a piece of paper and threw it to Andrea. Here's some miniature, Arlo, Andrea said. Maybe you'll get held back. Huh? I asked. What do you mean held back? Didn't you know? Andrea said. They take the bad kids and have them repeat the grade all over again. You're a bad kid, so you might be held back. What? Could they really do that? If I had known that make kids repeat a grade, I wouldn't have done so much bad stuff. The next morning, we had to go to the all-purpose room for an assembly. Mrs. Clutch got an offstage with Officer Spence, our school security guard. Officer Spence was wearing a fireman costume. Today, we're going to learn about fire safety, Mr. Clutch said. Officer Spence is a trained firefighter. Fire is very dangerous, kids, said Officer Spence. Does anybody know what you should do if your clothes catch on fire? I raised my hand, and Officer Spence pointed to me. If your clothes catch on fire, he said, you should buy new clothes. Everybody laughed, even though I didn't say anything funny. Before you buy new clothes, Officer Spence, you should stop, drop, and roll. Watch this. Officer Spence did the most amazing thing in the history of the world. He poured some stuff on the fireman costume. He took a lighter out of his pocket and set himself on fire. Officer Spence's fireman costume was full of flames. Stop, drop, and roll, shouted Mr. Clutch. Stop, drop, and roll. We all started chanting. Officer Spence threw himself on the ground and covered his nose. When he rolled all over the stage, the fire was out. Officer Spence makes no sense. He told us that he wouldn't go home and set ourselves on fire. We learned all kinds of other stuff about preventing fires too. Like you shouldn't never set your brother or sister on fire. When we got back to class, Ryan's mom was waiting for us. Ryan hid under his desk. Andrea's mom was waiting for us too. Andrea sat up even straighter than usual, if that's possible, and folded her arms so her mother would know how perfect she is. The two PTA moms told Mrs. Daisy that the class had a surprise for her. We all went to our cubbies to get our presents. Then we lined up and put them on Mrs. Daisy's desk. I got you a box of bonbons, I told Mrs. Daisy. Hey, I got a box of bonbons too, said Michael. So did I, said Emily. Me too, said Nell, the new kid. Turned out that just about everybody in class got Mrs. Daisy's bonbons. That's a lot of bonbons. Thank you so much, Mrs. Daisy said. You know how much I love bonbons. And everybody loves bonbons, said Emily. Why don't you open the box right now? Michael suggested. Oh, I really shouldn't. I'm trying to eat healthier, said Mrs. Daisy said. Well, maybe just one. Andrea's mom passed out bonbons to everyone. While we ate them, Mrs. Dole went on in front of the class. Part of my job as a PTA president is to plan your graduation. She said, you're going to wear caps and gowns, and there will be a guest speaker and a big cake. And you're going to get diplomas and... Is that all really necessary? Asked Andrea's mom. With that due respect, the children are just moving up to third grade. Just moving up to third grade, Mrs. Dole said. This is an important milestone in the children's lives. Our babies are growing up so fast. Soon they'll be off to middle school. Before we knew it, they'll be in high school and they'll be going off to college, and I won't see my little boy anymore. Mrs. Dole started sobbing. Ryan looked like she was gonna die. I thought his mom might tell more stories about Ryan peeing, but she just blew a nose in the teacher and blubbered something about how much we grew since we were in kindergarten. Andrea's mom rolled her eyes. I don't think she likes Ryan's mom very much, but she can't do anything about it because Ryan's mom is the PTA president and she's the only vice president. Finally, after 1,100,000 hours, the PTA moms left. Is my mother gone? Ryan asked. Yeah, I told him. You can come back up now. Getting ready for the big day. It was the last week of school, so we hardly learned anything. That was fine with me because learning stuff is boring, but it was hard to concentrate. I kept thinking how in a few days we would be off for summer. Mrs. Daisy wasn't concentrating either. We had a new hobby, knitting. She was pretty much sat on the back of the room knitting while Ryan's mom helped us get ready for graduation. Sometimes Andrea's mom came in too, but she spent most of the time rolling her eyes. Boy, she sure rolls her eyes a lot. Eye rolling must run in Andrea's family. We had to do all kinds of stuff to get ready for graduation. Did you know that when you get graduate, you should wear a weird cap on your head that's shaped like a square? Nobody knows why. Mrs. Dole asked our art teacher, Miss Hannah, to help us make the cast out of construction paper and cardboard. Miss Hannah also helped us make graduation banners inside to decorate the holiday. On Thursday, Mrs. Dole had to march from the gym to the playground behind the school so we can learn how to make a grand entrance for our parents. She made us practice over and over again until she got it right. Did you ever hear the graduation song? It was a song that we always play at graduation. Mrs. Dole asked our music teacher, Mr. Loring, to play the song on the accordion while she marched around the playground. He told us the real name of the song is Palm the Circumstance, but nobody knows why. The song doesn't have words. It goes like this: dum 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 dum. That's a dumb song, if you ask me. Songs are supposed to have words, so I made up words to the graduation song. They do like this: I'm graduating. There's a square on my head. Why is there a square on my head? Because I'm graduating. You repeat over and over again. While we were marching around the playground, I taught the words to everybody. Soon the whole class was singing. It was cool, and Mrs. Dole told us to knock it off. Practicing for graduation our morning was boring. I couldn't wait for lunch. Finally, after 1,100,000 hours, Mrs. Dole said it was time to go to the dormitory to eat. I sat on the table with the guys. Michael tried to juggle out water thoughts. Now the news kid put cookies over his eyes. Ryan poured salt on his tongue. Andrea and Anna and friends sat at the next table talking about girly stuff, like what color dresses their dolls like to wear. What are you guys doing over summer? Asked Ryan. I'm going to a sleepaway camp, asked Naya. I'm going to a football camp, said Michael. I'm going to a cooking camp, said Ryan. My family is going to rent a house at the beach, I said. I didn't ask Andrea what she would be doing over the summer. She was probably going to learn about multiplication tables so she could be smarter than anybody in the 3rd grade. Andrea was sitting there all quiet. I figured she was still mad because her mom lost the PTA election. You're still mad because your mom lost the PTA election? I asked her. No, Andrea said. I'm worried about Mrs. Daisy. What about her? Asked Emily, all concerned. Well, haven't you noticed? Andrea said. Mrs. Daisy had put on a lot of weight. She's getting fat. It must be all those bonbons we gave her, said Mel and the new kid. She's probably eating a box every night, Brian said. That's not good for her, said Emily. It's all your fault, Andrea said. You're the one who started giving her bonbons. Why is everything always my fault? I didn't force Mrs. Daisy to eat so many bonbons. What is Andrea's problem? I wish a truck full of bonbons would fall on her head.